Daniels' mom, Regina Jackson, spoke on protecting her son from women who prey on millionaire athletes and responded to the backlash she receives on social media. She said he's been very acclimated in sports since he was young, but he doesn't know the business world. He doesn't know the predators or the vultures that could be out there, so he feels very comfortable in knowing that not only am I educated and qualified to do it, I'm also his mom. So I don't want this to be about her parenting, because that's her son. She can, parent however she chooses to parent. But I'm curious from you guys, what's some advice you wish you learned sooner when dealing with women entering the space of fame and money?
Man. That's interesting, because what she's basically saying is he's not ready. She told the whole world he's not ready.
That's a fact.
And he might be a lick. Pause.
That's a fact.
That's what she told everybody.
Yeah,
in hindsight, because if you're walking around with him, they just like, we gotta get him away from his mother. Once we get him away from his mother, we good.
Yeah.
You go over there and ask her this. I'm gonna go over there and give him the number.
Yeah.
They're gonna just have to tag team.
Yeah.
But what I think, what I could have learned, I think we learned everything we needed to know.
But what do you wish you learned sooner?
I kind of knew everything.
Oh.
What about you, Killer? I think we by the time we was 10, we saw so much. It was by the time you get 14, I was 28. Yeah. By the time I got 21, I was 50 years old.
Well, listen, what I'll say is this before I tell you about what I learned and shouldn't have learned about Jayden and his mother. What I took, and I don't put this in street terms, I don't mean to be disrespectful about what I'm about to say, but I took it as she said, this nigga's slow. This nigga's they gonna get this nigga. So I got to stay by this nigga's side.
Yeah.
This nigga right here, I remember.
She doing her part though.
Yeah, I dig it. Listen, let me tell you something. This is a true story. My son was about 11. And then 11 or 12. Maybe 13, he was still in middle school, maybe 7th grade. So he comes back from the store, and this nigga got a shopping cart full of Valentine's Day candy, about 15 heart candies, the heart joints. I said, what are you doing? You got a little shorty in school and all that? He said, no, one, I was going to give them to all the girls and, pass them out to all of them. I was like, all right. I ain't against that. All of them, I see where you're going with it. You know what I'm saying? He's like, yeah. So, me and his mother wasn't together at the time. He comes see me on the weekends. He went home that weekend, that Sunday, to go to school Monday. His mother called me and said, you know what the fuck your son trying to do? The fuck is he talking about? He going to give all the girls fucking hearts in school and all this shit. You knew about this? I was like, I heard about it. I don't really know exactly what he said. Yeah, this nigga bugging the fuck out talking about he giving everybody hearts. I said, is it really wrong? Little Romeo, son? He's like, he ain't doing it, Kim. And if you supported this, I'm telling you now, he's not doing it. I'm not letting him take one candy to school for none of the girls. And I was like, all right, it didn't work that way. But I'm just giving you a protective mother's point of view, even though this is a nigga with just heart candy. This ain't a nigga with 28 millions of dollars. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And we're talking about 11-year-old as opposed to a 24-year-old also. But that's what I get from it. I get that same vibe. Like, if it was up to this nigga, he be broke right now. Yeah. That's what this mother's giving me.
Yeah, that's what she basically saying. Sometimes sometimes you train a child, but then after you train them, they still don't got it. And you gotta stay around.
Yeah, listen, man.
Said, I gotta watch. I'm protecting my investment.
Yeah, 100%. That's one of those situations.
And I support it.
She might knock on the door and say, I just slipped a condom under the door. Make sure you strapped in there. Like, listen, and back to something I could have learned. No, may such a say made it great, but time you're 10, you're 14. When you're 14, you're 28. When you're 28, you're 62. Growing up at home, let me tell people, and not just the streets, and not just women, and not just anything. sometimes the best teacher is experience.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't about going to class. It isn't about what somebody could tell you. Niggas could talk to you till their face is blue and your ears fall off, and then you still don't listen. The best thing is experience. I knock on wood all the time and very, very thankful. You got to think about this, right? And knocking on wood and thanking God as well, 100%. Mace, multi-selling rapper, not just that, very successful businessman. Me, multi-selling, when I say multi-million sales in music, both of us, actor, philanthropist, businessman. I got one kid, he got two. How many kids? We could have been out here, could have been crazy. By the same woman. Shit could have been wild out here now. I thank God all the time. Shit could have went left a few times now. Don't pop up tomorrow, ladies, neither.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah, but shit could have went.
Because we knew what to look out for.
That's the reason.
We knew about all of that.
You know how many times, and not going with again. You know how many times girls say, "Yo, Kim, I think I'm pregnant." I said, "I don't know about who. I had a vasectomy." They like, "Oh, nah, I wasn't pregnant." Never had a vasectomy. You ain't gonna fool me. I fooled you. That's what I'm trying to tell you. All them games the girls play.
Letting a girl give you a condom.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we should use protection.
Right. Meet me at the hotel. They booked the room already. Nah, I'm changing the room. Nah, I'm not going in that room that you booked. Won't get me on tape. Have some niggas run up in here while I'm here. No, absolutely not. So thank God, 100%. To me, what Mace was trying to say, and I can't speak for him, but from what I got from what he's saying and what I'm saying, the best experience is teachers because, listen, man, we ain't never had a problem with no bitches. Before the music, the bitches never been a problem. You know what I'm saying? That was the last thing was a problem. They became problems when we started getting some money. Like, yo, get away from a nigga, man. I nutted. I got to get back to this money, man. You know, I remember Mace used to, and I'm not bringing, I'm talking about high school. Mace used to fight girls off of me. I see Mace walking routes that he shouldn't be walking school that way. He walking this way. You know, I'm just saying, where you going? I'm seeing third period. Listen, I'm just saying it never really been a problem. So thank God, and that's like I said, a lot of shit could have went left, but thank God that before any success or money that
one host even recalls something from high school, talking about a friend physically positioning himself between him and other guys as they move through the hallways, a memory that gets mentioned almost jokingly but actually reinforces the larger message. Even before fame or real money entered their lives, there was already an instinct to control exposure and look out for one another, long before there was anything substantial to protect financially. The bigger implication is that the instinct to recognize danger was already there, but once fame and wealth arrived, the stakes became dramatically higher, and that combination of money plus visibility transformed ordinary interactions into situations requiring strategy, awareness, and serious caution. By the time the segment reaches its conclusion, the hosts repeatedly return to gratitude, emphasizing that they're thankful things never went further off the rails than they did, and openly admitting that a handful of different decisions where slightly different circumstances could have produced completely different outcomes in their own lives. That ending is important because it changes the way everything said earlier should be understood. The warnings about manipulation, the stories involving suspicious hotel rooms, and the experiences with pregnancy claims aren't being presented as bragging or some glamorous blueprint for navigating women and fame. They're being shared as cautionary lessons built from genuine relief and the knowledge that things could have gone badly, coming from two people who understand firsthand how thin the line can be between getting through a situation and having it completely change your life. And that is ultimately why the hosts seem to understand Regina Jackson's approach. They don't spend much time arguing over whether staying heavily involved in her son's business is the perfect strategy, or whether another method might better prepare a young athlete for the responsibilities ahead. Instead, they focus on the instinct underneath her decision, the concern that Jayden may not yet have the experience needed to recognize people who could exploit him. And that concern is something they immediately recognize because they've personally experienced that same vulnerability in their own lives. It's also important to step back and understand why this particular story grabbed their attention in the first place, because Jayden Daniels is far from an unknown athlete. He's a young quarterback who has already attracted major national attention through his performance on the field. And that level of exposure is exactly what makes every risk the hosts describe grow much faster. As an athlete becomes more recognizable, the entire ecosystem around him expands, bringing agents, marketing representatives, potential business partners, and new acquaintances who can suddenly appear the moment his name begins generating serious attention. For a mother watching that world develop around her son in real time, wanting to remain close doesn't necessarily come from irrational paranoia. It can come from watching the number of people seeking access increase faster than her son's own experience can develop enough to evaluate them. The hosts don't spend much time breaking down every detail of Jayden's career, but the sheer size of his profile is clearly what gives this story its significance. If he were a relatively unknown athlete with little public attention, his mother's comments probably wouldn't have sparked the same backlash or become a major talking point on a show like this. It's precisely because he is positioned to become an extremely visible and potentially extremely wealthy public figure that any public statement questioning his readiness instantly becomes newsworthy. That visibility also helps explain why the hosts consider Regina Jackson's decision to publicly defend her involvement unusual, even though the instinct behind it may actually be common among families of young athletes. Plenty of parents remain heavily involved in their children's contracts, appearances, finances, and career decisions, often operating quietly through family offices, managers, or trusted advisors, without ever explaining that involvement publicly. What separates this situation is that Regina didn't simply ignore the criticism and move forward. She responded to it directly and effectively put her reasoning on the record, defending why she remains so closely connected to her son's career. The hosts see that decision as revealing all by itself. Instead of dismissing the criticism or allowing a representative to craft a safer public response, she personally explained why she doesn't yet trust everyone surrounding her son to necessarily put his interests first. That's a much stronger declaration than simply helping behind the scenes, and it's what transforms this from a private family arrangement into something worthy of public commentary. The hosts aren't suggesting that her behavior is unusual because mothers shouldn't protect their children. They're saying the unusual part is taking that reasoning public, because once she openly says her son isn't prepared to handle these situations alone, she inevitably invites scrutiny of both his maturity and her own methods of managing that transition. Beneath the entire discussion is a much larger pattern in professional sports that the hosts never fully spell out but clearly understand. There is a long and well-known history of athletes earning enormous amounts of money quickly and then watching those fortunes disappear just as fast, sometimes because they lacked anyone around them capable of identifying predatory financial relationships before the damage was done. And that may be one of the most revealing moments in the entire segment, because instead of simply criticizing Regina or analyzing her situation from a distance, the hosts acknowledge their own vulnerability and how easily circumstances could have gone another way. Suddenly, this isn't just two men judging a mother's decision from the outside. It's two men who have personally experienced the exact kind of environment Regina is trying to shield her son from, explaining just how close that world can come to producing a very different ending. From there, the conversation becomes much more blunt and detailed as the hosts begin describing the tactics, warning signs, and uncomfortable situations they say they learned to recognize over the years, mostly through experience, mistakes, and close calls, rather than someone sitting them down and explaining the rules. They discuss situations involving women allegedly making false pregnancy claims, explaining how one of them eventually developed an almost automatic response of questioning every claim, whether it turned out to be legitimate or not, because repeated exposure to manipulation surrounding paternity made the pattern impossible to ignore. They also describe the subtle tests that can come with sudden fame, money, and visibility, including someone volunteering to bring protection during a hookup, which the host interprets not as a thoughtful gesture, but potentially as a carefully disguised setup, or someone insisting that a particular hotel room has already been arranged, something he immediately views as a warning sign that cameras or recording equipment could already be waiting. He says he would actually change rooms when situations like that raised suspicion. And none of this is presented as fear for the sake of fear. The hosts frame it as survival knowledge built over years by two men who operated inside the entertainment industry at a level where these scenarios were not imaginary possibilities, but recurring risks they genuinely had to navigate. What's especially revealing is that they identify a very specific point when their world began to change. They make it clear that women weren't the problem before they became successful. According to their own stories, that part of life was relatively simple and drama-free throughout much of their childhood, until music started bringing serious money into the equation. That's when the entire dynamic shifted, because suddenly attention and access could become connected to their earning power, instead of simply being about who they were as people. One host even recalls something from high school, talking about a friend physically positioning himself between him and other guys as they moved through the hallways, a memory that gets mentioned almost jokingly, but actually reinforces the larger message. Even before fame or real money entered their lives, there was already an instinct to control exposure and look out for one another, long before there was anything substantial to protect financially. The bigger implication is that the instinct to recognize danger was already there, but once fame and wealth arrived, the stakes became dramatically higher, and that combination of money plus visibility transformed ordinary interactions into situations requiring strategy, awareness, and serious caution. By the time the segment reaches its conclusion, the hosts repeatedly return to gratitude, emphasizing that they're thankful things never went further off the rails than they did, and openly admitting that a handful of different decisions or slightly different circumstances could have produced completely different outcomes in their own lives. That ending is important because it changes the way everything said earlier should be understood. The warnings about manipulation, the stories involving suspicious hotel rooms, and the experiences with pregnancy claims aren't being presented as bragging or some glamorous blueprint for navigating women and fame. They're being shared as cautionary lessons built from genuine relief and the knowledge that things could have gone badly, coming from two people who understand firsthand how thin the line can be between getting through a situation and having it completely change your life. And that is ultimately why the hosts seem to understand Regina Jackson's approach. They don't spend much time arguing over whether staying heavily involved in her son's business is the perfect strategy, or whether another method might better prepare a young athlete for the responsibilities ahead. Instead, they focus on the instinct underneath her decision, the concern that Jayden may not yet have the experience needed to recognize people who could exploit him. And that concern is something they immediately recognize because they've personally experienced that same vulnerability in their own lives. It's also important to step back and understand why this particular story grabbed their attention in the first place, because Jayden Daniels is far from an unknown athlete. He's a young quarterback who has already attracted major national attention through his performance on the field, and that level of exposure is exactly what makes every risk the hosts describe grow much faster. As an athlete becomes more recognizable, the entire ecosystem around him expands, bringing agents, marketing representatives, potential business partners, and new acquaintances who can suddenly appear the moment his name begins generating serious attention. For a mother watching that world develop around her son in real time, wanting to remain close doesn't necessarily come from irrational paranoia. It can come from watching the number of people seeking access increase faster than her son's own experience can develop enough to evaluate them. The hosts don't spend much time breaking down every detail of Jayden's career, but the sheer size of his profile is clearly what gives this story its significance. If he were a relatively unknown athlete with little public attention, his mother's comments probably wouldn't have sparked the same backlash or become a major talking point on a show like this. It's precisely because he is positioned to become an extremely visible and potentially extremely wealthy public figure that any public statement questioning his readiness instantly becomes newsworthy. That visibility also explains why the hosts consider Regina Jackson's decision to publicly defend her involvement unusual, even though the instinct behind it may actually be common among families of young athletes. Plenty of parents remain heavily involved in their children's contracts, appearances, finances, and career decisions, often operating quietly through family offices, managers, or trusted advisors without ever explaining that involvement publicly. What separates this situation is that Regina didn't simply ignore the criticism and move forward. She responded to it directly and effectively put her reasoning on the record, defending why she remains so closely connected to her son's career. That's a much stronger declaration than simply helping behind the scenes, and it's what transforms this from a private family arrangement into something worthy of public commentary. The hosts aren't suggesting that her behavior is unusual because mothers shouldn't protect their children. They're saying the unusual part is taking that reasoning public, because once she openly says her son isn't prepared to handle these situations alone, she inevitably invites scrutiny of both his maturity and her own methods of managing that transition. Beneath the entire discussion is a much larger pattern in professional sports that the hosts never fully spell out but clearly understand. There is a long and well-known history of athletes earning enormous amounts of money quickly and then watching those fortunes disappear just as fast, sometimes because they lacked anyone around them capable of identifying predatory financial relationships before the damage was done. Sports media is filled with cautionary stories about signing bonuses disappearing through questionable investments, entourages consuming enormous resources, and personal relationships eventually turning into costly legal battles. Regina Jackson's comments essentially place her in the role of someone trying to keep her son from becoming another cautionary story, and the host's willingness to understand that instinct, instead of simply labeling it controlling, reflects just how familiar these outcomes have become throughout professional sports. So when one host says that if Jayden Daniels were left completely to his own judgment, he could potentially end up broke, he's not necessarily making a random prediction about one young athlete's spending habits. He's pointing toward a pattern that has played out publicly again and again, where limited experience, sudden wealth, and a constantly changing circle of people combine to create serious financial consequences. And underneath all of this is an even deeper question about what can actually be taught and what only experience can truly teach, because that tension between instruction and first-hand experience is arguably the real intellectual backbone holding this entire segment together. The hosts keep coming back to one central idea. You can warn somebody 100 times, explain every possible scenario, and walk them through every danger imaginable, but none of it truly sinks in until they personally experience something that makes the lesson real. One host describes it almost poetically, arguing that someone can talk to you until they're completely exhausted, and you still might ignore them, because hearing a warning in theory is nothing like understanding it through consequences. And that creates a fascinating contrast with Regina Jackson's approach, because her strategy is essentially built around preventing that hard lesson from happening in the first place. She's choosing to remain close, stay involved, and step into the room specifically because she doesn't want her son to learn these lessons through the kind of painful experiences the hosts themselves had to endure. The hosts never completely settle that contradiction, but their stories quietly support both sides at the same time. On one side, they acknowledge that experience is often the teacher nobody can replace, admitting that simply being warned about these dangers probably wouldn't have made them understand them when they were younger. But on the other side, they also admit that surviving their own situations wasn't solely the result of lessons learned through failure, because luck, timing, and having certain people intervene at the right moment played a major role as well, which is essentially the same protective function Regina Jackson is trying to provide for her son today, even if she's doing it in her own way. And that's the thread that gives this conversation far more weight than the original headline. What begins as commentary about one athlete's mother defending her decision to remain deeply involved in his business life gradually turns into something much more personal, almost like a shared confession from two men who have experienced fame, money, and everything that suddenly comes attached to both, using Jayden Daniels' situation as a reflection of their own lives, rather than simply treating him as the target of criticism. They're not ridiculing Regina Jackson for being protective. If anything, the longer they talk, the more it sounds like they either wish someone had occupied that exact role for them earlier in their careers, or feel genuinely fortunate that someone in their lives, whether family, friends, or simply circumstance, stepped in before the consequences became much worse. The Candy Heart story works as such an effective anchor because it reduces the entire argument to something almost impossible to misunderstand. A parent sees that their child doesn't fully understand the consequences of a decision and chooses to intervene anyway, regardless of how that decision might look to outsiders. Now take that same situation and scale it from an 11-year-old carrying a cart full of candy to a 24-year-old professional athlete negotiating endorsement deals and handling serious wealth, and suddenly the connection to the Jayden Daniels story becomes obvious. For viewers wondering why this particular situation created so much conversation, the answer lies in the intersection between celebrity commentary and genuine personal experience. The hosts could have easily sat back and judged Regina Jackson's parenting from a distance, giving the kind of detached opinions commentators often give about public figures they have never actually met. Instead, the conversation repeatedly pulls them toward their own past, their own mistakes, their own close calls, and their own relief that certain situations didn't end much worse. That transformation from commentary into confession is what gives the segment its emotional punch, and it's also why the central message hits harder than a simple opinion about a headline ever could. It's equally important to notice what the hosts deliberately avoid saying, because that restraint reveals almost as much as their actual comments. Neither host spends significant time trying to identify specific people who might be targeting Jayden Daniels. They also don't present some detailed list of tactics that every young athlete should follow, beyond the broader advice to remain aware and listen to people who have already survived similar situations. The discussion stays focused on reflection rather than becoming a step-by-step instruction manual, which actually fits the larger argument they've been making all along. This type of awareness can't simply be transferred through a list of rules. It has to develop through experience, usually by being around someone who already learned those lessons the difficult way. Whether that's a parent, an older friend, or, in this case, two public figures using their platform to explain what they wish somebody had made clearer to them when they were younger. In that sense, the segment feels less like conventional advice and more like testimony, shared because Regina Jackson's public comments created an opening for the hosts to reveal experiences they might never have discussed otherwise.
That also explains the dramatic tonal shift that happens midway through the conversation, when the focus moves away from judging someone else's decisions and turns inward toward the host's own history. Once they begin describing the specific ways people allegedly tried to exploit their success, including pregnancy claims they considered false, suspicious hotel arrangements, and the dramatic difference in how women approached them before and after serious money entered their lives, the discussion becomes almost completely detached from Jayden Daniels. At that point, Jayden is no longer really the subject, he's the event that opened the door. And that's a common feature of long-form conversations like this, where a public headline becomes the entry point, but the most revealing material comes from the hosts using that headline to unpack parts of their own lives they might not have explored without the initial prompt. Viewers who expected a straightforward opinion about one athlete's family situation end up hearing something much closer to a survival story from two men who experienced, in a less publicly managed way, many of the same vulnerabilities Regina Jackson is trying to prevent her son from facing. Strip everything down, and the message is pretty powerful. Wealth and visibility fundamentally change the dynamics of almost every relationship a young public figure enters. The people capable of recognizing those changes early are rare, and whether that protection comes from a parent staying close, friends stepping in when necessary, or even simple luck, some form of protection can become the difference between a career remaining stable and everything falling apart around it. Regina Jackson's critics see excessive involvement. The hosts, looking back through their own experiences, see something much closer to an insurance policy, an imperfect but understandable response to a danger they've personally seen play out. Whether her exact strategy will ultimately be the right long-term choice for her son isn't something the hosts pretend they can determine, and to their credit, they don't claim to have that answer. What they do believe, because they've lived through it themselves, is that the danger she's talking about is very real, and in that environment, trusting the wrong person can cost dramatically more than being a little too cautious ever will. That's ultimately where the segment lands, not with a final judgment on one mother's parenting, but with a hard-earned acknowledgement that the world Jayden Daniels is entering can be brutally unforgiving, exactly as Regina Jackson appears to believe. And the people who understand that reality most clearly are often the ones who came dangerously close to learning it the hardest way possible.